So welcome back to the second half of our morning here on March 2nd in the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee. At this point, we are here with Secretary Naylor from ADS to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the digital services and IT proposals in the FY24 budget. So thank you very much, Secretary Naylor, for coming back.
Thank you. For the record, Sean Naylor, Secretary of Digital Services. Hope everyone's having a good morning and appreciate the opportunity. I know when we got to speak to you last, I was remote and I never liked those. So I'm glad we could come back and kind of go over some of these key elements. Again, if it's all right with you, I would like to start with the CIS ones. I think that one's pretty straightforward. And then we'll go into the ADS projects, they asked for the IT modernization fund.
Sounds great.
So on the CIS system, we look at this as would be part of what we're developing in what we call CDDIS, the Child Development Division's Information System. And it is, I guess I would say, rather unusual for us to endorse something that didn't originate within the executive branch. So for our perspective, I know the original source of this was a grant through DCF to like investigate it. And if it comes to the point by which we would want to continue that effort, that's the approach we would want to take. It would be DCF in cooperation with us, ensuring that, you know, our standards would be applied through the grant, our expectations, you know, our cybersecurity, all of those things would be in it. So in the context of how that proposal's kind of coming in and not following our typical channels, you know, we're not supportive of that approach. We would much rather do it how we normally do work, by which it would be initiated through a cooperative effort between AHS, Department of Children and Families, and ADS. Be glad to take any specific questions you may have.
Representative Chase.
What kind of timeline would we expect for that? I think we heard from CIS that they'd be able to roll out the first couple of sites this year. How would that compare to the ADS?
So the phase one of the Child Development Division Information System is wrapping up now. And that is built in Salesforce. And so that would be a future. It's not planned right now, so I can't give you a time frame, but it would be the current system, the new system is being implemented in CDDIS. So it would be a year or more out.
And when did that start? One of the things I heard from CIS was that we've been trying to do that for a decade and it's never quite got there. So they want to try to do it themselves.
Probably fair. I'm not familiar with previous attempts. The current CDDIS bill on Salesforce project started in, where are we? Fall of 20.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
With kind of I guess I'll say the minimal viable product was delivered towards the end of calendar year 21. And then 22 and this year is working on finalizing it and rolling it out. There were some challenges around payroll and stuff like that that needed to be sorted out to the childcare facilities.
Okay. And would this new version work for all 12 departments or just the 10 that are currently independent?
So what is in the CIS is not part of this version of what we're doing in the Child Development Division Information System, but that is the right place for it to land. So the rollout would not address it for what the CIS proposal does immediately, but that's the proper place for it to be long term.
Would the CIS plan, if they started building this with the Salesforce integration across Salesforce platforms, is easier than across divergent platforms? If they start building that, can they build it in such a way that it works with your requirements and take some of the load off to help roll it out a little bit sooner?
We would have to look at that in depth. So the state of Vermont the executive branch has taken a single org strategy. So all of our Salesforce work is in one single Salesforce instance organization. And because of that, we have a standardized data model so that all the applications have to agree. So we have a very coordinated effort to make sure that we don't step on other applications' toes because all of the data is in this common data model. So in order for that, there would have to be an in-depth analysis to see how far the CIS as currently built deviates from all of our standard practices in Salesforce before it could become a part of our environment.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Representative Rowe.
So just trying to reflect and make sure I'm hearing what you're saying. So you're saying you don't support the plan?
Correct.
That CIS has been wanting for years, so they don't have to enter things. But there's not a plan right now to an alternative.
So how I would like to characterize that is that work is not scheduled to be done right now, but all of the foundational work where this would be done is what's being completed in this CDDIS system currently. So from more of a, we would rather take like a single system holistic look. And so what is in CIS would just be a component of this larger system for us.
Representative Waters Evans.
Thank you. So if they're already doing this in Washington County and it's okay and everyone's fine with it and they consulted with you in the first part, what would be the downside or the detriment to allowing these additional 3 agencies? Like what would change about allowing them to do this that would prohibit you from switching them over later? Should it happen or
So the way we implement Salesforce here, the likelihood that we could just pull it into our environment is pretty slim, but that's what I was saying to Representative Chase. We would have to do an in-depth analysis on it. My fundamental concern is that it would be a distraction from the work we're trying to do now in the child development space and then the larger child welfare information system. So anything that kind of goes on in parallel, if it's intended to come back in and be part of an overarching system, would take significant oversight on our part to ensure that moving forward. I mean, if Central Vermont and the other parties want to move this forward independently, that's their prerogative, right? But as far as looking for us, ADS, to endorse this approach is not what we're striving to do. We're looking to not have more systems across state government delivering services to Vermonters. We want less, better systems. And that's how we're moving forward and why we're focused on the systems we are in cooperation with DCF.
Other questions for the secretary on the CIS piece? I think that's pretty clear. Thank you very much, Secretary Naylor.
I figured that would be the easier one. So thank you. Hopefully you all have a presentation that was provided in front of you that we'll walk through. The next portion we're going to speak to is our 2 one-time funding asks for this budget cycle. So we'll get into it. There's a little bit of a background here on the Technology Modernization Fund, which was established last year. Currently has in it there's 40 million that we have spending authority for and $63 million in total for modernization efforts. Those are to do the things that are outlined here, are modernizing our enterprise resource planning system, which is currently PeopleSoft and moving to Workday. So how we manage the people and do the finances of the executive branch. The workplace information management system for buildings and general services, fire safety, records management modernization, and case management system for the Attorney General's office. And then at the end of, and I'm just recapping this because we went through this with BAA, but I kind of want to level set. There was some conditional funding for the second phase of the DMV modernization, and also the remaining amount to fully fund the modernization of unemployment insurance. And that conditional funding was based on whether or not there was, at the end of the prior fiscal year, there was excess revenue, which there was. So that triggered the approximately 25 million for the second half of the DMV modernization to be appropriated to us, or given, to be appropriated and have the spending authority on it. And then the 30 million for the modernization of the unemployment insurance system, which we currently have about 3 million in spending authority, with the remainder sitting in reserve until we come back to you after all the contract work and can present like who's the vendor and how that project is going to go.
Representative Rowe.
Just a bit of detail for there. Other states such as Rhode Island, I think, are moved their unemployment system and other to the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Are we proposing to keep the old system and continue to build up our own hardware, or are we using?
Emphatically, no. We're still in negotiations. It's an active procurement, so I can't say like who the vendor is in the exact model, but one of the conditions of us modernizing was for us to move that hosting and responsibility of maintaining the core system onto the vendor and outside of state resources. So that will be part of this project.
Thank you.
Yep. So that's kind of where we're at as far as IT modernization. It's been we have these projects in flight. I'm not sure if Lisa Gavin, the Joint Fiscal Office's IT consultant, has been in to talk about the DMV project, but that one's on schedule and on budget to deliver the first modernization there for November of this year. And so, these monies, we've already, we're in the vendor selection process for implementation services with the ERP. We're in the same with the unemployment insurance system. So these projects are moving forward. This year, what we're asking for is to build upon that modernization investment, but to do it with an ask of $15 million. So that $15 million is in two categories. One is a distinct project. And so I'm going to move on to my second slide, or it's actually a third slide, count the cover, which is the reimplementation of our network and security infrastructure. And that's $10 million. There will be a slide a little bit later that talks about the details of it. It's actually a $12.3 million effort by which we have ongoing infrastructure upgrades budgeted as part of our internal service fund. And we anticipate this to be a 2-year project. So we're going to utilize what we have as part of that funding over the 2 years to pair with the ask of the one-time appropriation for the 10 million to get us to the 12.3 million for the network modernization. And then the second, I don't want to say it's a project because it's a loose collection of initiatives, is how I'd like to describe it, is 5 million to bridge a number of gaps that we've had. I don't know how much you recall the day we talked about and gave our budget testimony, but our CFO, Kate Slocum, gave an in-depth kind of review of how internal service funds work, our different bill back mechanisms to the agencies and departments. And I think you may recall that when I showed that our general fund appropriation is like this little tiny green dot on a out of all of our budget. Most everything we get is through financial chargebacks and billbacks to the agencies and departments. And what that puts us in a position to do is we can recover our costs for things like a project management solution on our ongoing costs. We can recover our costs for our help desk and ticketing solutions. But what we don't have is the money to modernize. So if we If we feel like there is a better solution out there for state government to help deliver services like respond to trouble calls and things like that and get a more, a different ticketing solution, we don't have the means to make that initial investment. We have the ongoing costs covered, but what we lack is the ability to modernize ourselves. What I've characterized it to staff internally is this is what is needed in order for ADS to lead by example. We have focused a lot on partnering with the other agencies and departments in the executive branch to deliver projects. The ones that have been requested over the last couple of years are all related to human services, agency of administration, transportation, education, our peers. But we've not come after funding to help us kind of modernize all of the things that we utilize to help deliver those services to the rest of the agencies and departments. So this $5 million is like a categorical funding to allow us to modernize a number of different areas. I talked about project management. I talked about we have a reporting, kind of an analysis and reporting tool in there that we would like to modernize for infrastructure like servers and data center operations, which is independent of the network. Our help desk and ticketing solution. These are inventory management. We don't have a comprehensive solution to manage approximately 12,000 of these that we're responsible for in the executive branch. We utilize some spreadsheets, some SharePoint sites, a collection of things. And so what we're looking to do is get one-time money to be able to put in place those systems, because we do have the means to maintain them moving forward out of our current funding model. I'm going to pause there because that was a lot before we go into a little bit more depth. Chair.
Sure. One of the questions that folks have asked me is a little bit more about the timeline and a little bit of the nuance of when these things can be rolled out. If it's going to be a 2-year project, not funding it all at once, but maybe half this year and half next year kind of thing. So looking at the 10 million network security infrastructure project first, the budgetary costs I'm showing 8.2 for hardware and software, 1.6 for professional services and maintenance, and then 2.5 for project support costs. That's page 6.
Yep.
Can you break down a little bit more about where each portion of that would be spent, in which phase, as well as a little bit more about if we're in the RFI or RFP phase, how much of the project design is going to be done by the vendors who are bidding on the project. So that might offload some of the cost from the state, that sort of more nerdy stuff.
Yeah. It's a good question, right? And we're in that very high level planning stages, because one of the things we need is the funding to be able to put the resources on this to get into the details. How we're envisioning this working is that we're expecting to be able to leverage from the hardware vendors services that would be complementary based on the investment we're making to help meet that. But what we don't know is how much of that is, and then having a third-party solutions network architect that would tie that all together. And so we're not at the RFP stage yet. We haven't, finished out all the requirements and stuff, because that's part of what we need. Tying those to the phases. So the first 3 phases, right? The design workshops, the overall architectural design, and then the pilot is year 1, right? That's what we're envisioning as year 1. And we're going to see the majority of the professional services being tied into that window. We're going to see the majority of the project support costs, because one of the things, things we have in there are like project managers, business analysts, right? So to be able to go out to a site and understand if a courthouse, who are all the tenants, right? And what are the tenants' needs? So we make sure that we have right-sized circuits, that we're providing, WAPs wireless access points at the appropriate, density to provide the services. What are the local resources they need to have? So we're not designing a network that traffic flows back to Montpelier to turn around and go back for them to print on the printer that sits 6 feet to their right. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that is going to get into the details and will influence a lot of this. And then because I believe in we work from a position of knowledge, but we should trust but verify what we end up with for our final design. And with that in mind, that's where I call phase 3 is really all phases 1 through 3 are important to do before we do anything else. So that phase 3 is to do the pilot. And so then that gets into how much of that hardware and software cost will be needed depending on where the pilot sites are at and the results of that to determine how successful that pilot is. So if we were talking about, and I'm not an advocate for funding this over 2 years. I'll go on record as that. I'm open to the idea of funding it by having the check-ins like we did with UI to make sure that what we're doing, and like in that instance, Talk, that we can satisfy any questions or concerns the legislature has about our approach before giving the spending authority on the remainder. So from that perspective, I would say it's hard to guess, but I would say it's about a 50-50 over those 2 years for the 10 million, right? So that's a long answer to say, I would like, my preference is to have appropriated the 10 million. If there's got to be a checkpoint, that checkpoint would be after year 1. And I would say to get to that successfully would be about half the money to kind of validate and make any corrections, right? Because we want to be able to do a security audit on those things, remediate what we find. We need to have a fully baked plan and design before we roll this out globally, right? And so we need, so there's as much that goes into the planning as there is into the rest. So that's how I would characterize it.
And one of the things I really appreciate about the ADS model is the shift to the operational expense versus the capital expense. So for the hardware, what's the expected life cycle of that before, the hardware we're buying instead of leasing, it has to be replaced and upgraded again? Yeah,
so we've been operating on a 7-year life cycle, which has left us it's not allowed us to modernize much, right? So that's 16%. If every year we do 1/7 of our 16.67%, my quick math, of our infrastructure. So we don't get to modernize anything. We just replace components with modernized components, and we don't get to rethink it. Once this is implemented, our expectation is move to a 5-year life cycle so that we don't have infrastructure that we have that plays a critical role, and all of a sudden the vendor deprecates service for it and we no longer can get patches for it and maintain it, and now it becomes a risk. And that's what we always seem to worry about in year 6 and 7, is that something is going to, so we're going to move from a 7-year to a 5-year. But because of the change in the model from having all the traffic flow back to Montpelier for the most part, or to our other data center at Tech Vault in South Burlington, and then flowing out from there, we're envisioning an environment that has more, how do I want to call it, less industrial strength equipment in certain cases, so that instead of having to have $500,000 to upgrade this one edge piece, we now have this distributed environment where they're $10,000 units sitting all over the place. And so we're hoping that the aggregate of that infrastructure will come down so that we will not need to change our maintenance and operations cost, in that the new design will help us just close up that 2 years without having an impact in what we would need to operate it and maintain it. So 5 years post implementation is when we would start to replace the things that we're investing now, but we're also anticipating using some of our more recent infrastructure in the project. So we will start right in year one post implementation, taking some of that stuff and through life cycle, taking it out and using the money to modernize it.
Okay, so you're envisioning a lot of the hardware being state-owned instead of leased for this?
It will
like the
all be
routers,
state-owned.
Wireless access points and stuff?
Yeah. State does not a big fan of leasing equipment, especially in the technology space. So this will be ours to own.
Okay. And kind of following the same set of questions for the 5 million IT investments, security risk management, ticketing, monitoring, citizen portal, municipality portal, estimated timeline for a rollout of each of these sub-projects?
Yeah, so it's all over the place. A number of these, we've already done pilots as to what we want to move to. So we know, that's why, you see numbers like 530,000 and 360,000. We have pretty good ideas as to what the next generation of technology we want to migrate through, because we've had some sort of pilot or proof of concept in that area. So those are ready to go in like 6 months. Once we get the funding, we will be ready to issue, and often many of them will, we'll be able to buy licenses through our resellers, and then it would be just small RFPs for implementation of the new technology and kind of migrating us from one to the next. The two bigger ones, and there's a third one there that we're working with the Secretary of State's office on an existing project, which is the business portal, are more vaguely defined. And those would be, we would start with a conventional RFP to select a vendor for implementation on those and complete the business requirements. So the ones in the top three would move significantly quicker. The others would be probably more like 9 months before we were under contract for someone.
Portals?
Same platform, right? We want the same platform, but what we want to change how people do business with the executive branch. Right now, you need to know that the Agency of Natural Resources is responsible for a certain functional area, or you need to know that you need to go to the Department of Labor for this or the tax department for that, right? This is shifting it back to being very constituent focused, so that we're going to aggregate all of those things. So if you're coming in as a citizen, you'll be able to get regardless of, you don't need to know state government how to find it. If you come in as a business to register, the same thing, you won't need to know, and the same as a municipality, right? You've heard the governor advocating for $3 million to help municipalities be able to just figure out how to do all the ARPA opportunities and the stuff that, in the federal funding. And so what we're looking at is part of that is driven by, you've got to know the inner workings often of state government to be able to navigate it. And this is meant to address that long term.
And these would be basically read-only for outside sources. They wouldn't be submitting data. So
No, these are not. And and we use the term portal, and I don't like that term here. So I'm gonna change it. So strike portal from the record, and we're gonna call them digital platforms, because what this is, and I said this on a podcast recently, where you will never hear me characterize what we want to do as being an inch deep and a mile wide on anything, right? Because that's not where you want to be, because that's just on the surface. But when it comes to engaging our citizens, our constituents, that's where most would be comfortable, is just having some cursory information about us, about them, and trusting with us, so that we can direct them to the services that they qualify for and provide them like a consistent experience. So these portals are not just going to be like aggregating things and stuff, but it's actually going to be built, it's envisioned to be built around a CRM, so that we start to, so Sean Naylor will be known in there. There will be core contact information. It'll be places that system will gather, like, do I want to opt in to be able to get SMS messaging about, a text message when my driver's license is due for renewal? So it's going to be more than just another website where stuff is pulled together. It's going to give citizens the opportunity to grow with us as their trust grows, right? That's one of the things that's core to this, is that we recognize that not everyone is going to be an early adopter, right? People are going to have to start small, and all I may do is trust this digital platform with knowing just who I am and knowing my mailing address, so that everything that I do business with can be reflected, right? So the idea is that I have a name change or an address change, I come in here, I can make it, and then we can then manage behind the scenes the cascading results. So DMV gets that information, tax department gets that information. So that it's more than just a collection of the services that you might be eligible for.
Okay. And does it tie in with the integrated eligibility, or? Because what I'm hearing you describe is a similar level of single pane of glass kind of thing.
Interestingly, I would characterize it as a parent-child relationship. That the digital platforms that we're proposing building would be the parent. So that is, no matter who you are and kind of like your business with the state of Vermont, you would have a single door entry. And then we would figure out what you need to do. You know, this is where we want to start applying a little bit of AI and things like chatbots to help people figure out what they're, not what they think they want to do, but truly what they need to do, so that we don't send them down, all the way down a rabbit hole and be like, no, that's not really what you need to do. You need to talk to the person in the next office over type thing. And then in the situation of IE&E, we're really talking about that as growing into a human services digital platform. And we would pass them off to that as a result of like them kind of being authenticated and starting in the central citizen portal.
Okay. Cool. I think that covers my questions for now.
Did we lose you guys?
That actually answered all my questions and then beyond. Oh, that was actually very useful.
I'd be glad to geek out more on that. This is where, because this is more talking about the vision, right? And how the funding enables us to, what I started with saying is it enables ABS to lead by example. And we've just not had that opportunity. We've been working hard to get ahead of project delivery and make sure that our cybersecurity posture and stuff, but we've not had that ability to now get ahead and do these things, so that whether it's IE or the UI system or the DMV system, we can take on a certain central responsibility for those systems and help maintain a consistent experience for citizens, regardless of which system or transaction they're going to go execute.
Any other questions for Secretary Naylor?
Not blow up my presentation. I was going to give you all the statistic about how many network devices and everything else, but you don't, we could touch on that, but that was a really good, I think, kind of in-depth, Q&A on how we're envisioning using the money in both instances. We'll be glad to answer any other questions. Technology too, just product.
So we had not seen an introduction of H291, an act relating to the creation of Security Advisory Council.
Did you see my last slide?
I did see your last slide. So I was going to ask you if you wanted to use some time to that issue. It might be something we could talk about in the context of our boards and commissions bill that we're also talking about as well.
Okay. I will admit I'm not that up to speed on the boards and commissions bill, so to tell you that.
Don't worry about it. It's just germane.
Okay.
It would just be a vehicle.
So we're looking at the last slide. This was a teaser that we put in here with the hope that we could get to this. So the administration worked with Representatives Chase and Sibilia to put together H291, an act relating to, it says the creation of a cybersecurity advisory council, but what it really looks at is starting to define how government can play a role in Vermont on the security of critical infrastructure. And so that's what it's really about, is recognizing that whether it's the utility grid or the cellular service providers, the internet, broadband, landline-based providers, the home heating oil, if they're still home, those that can at times can be considered critical infrastructure, not all of them are regulated in a means. Healthcare, all the hospitals. And so when we look at things like, the UVM experience a couple of years ago, there's been interest in the executive branch. There's been interest in both the legislature to understand these things sooner. And the executive branch sits rather uniquely to be able to triangulate things that may be happening in different areas of Vermont that nobody else would put one and one together to say, oh, this is something bigger or different, right? If a SCADA system managing the delivery of the drinking water in Chittenden County is having issues, and then we also are getting reports of just say Montpelier's system, dumping to the Winooski River, and all of a sudden we sit in a position by which, if there's reporting and some standards adopted, to help to identify what could be broader risks. There's nobody, what I'm saying? There's no one that can be looking at the landscape in totality in Vermont and understand that if what looks like an isolated one-off event here, and then there's something else that's going on over here, and there's something else going on over here, and they're in 3 different industrial areas, there's no one that looks at that to say, is that really one thing going on? And then how do we broadcast and get to the others to be aware, and what does it look like, and how is it manifesting itself? And, so there's an opportunity, and this is definitely a crawl, walk, run opportunity, but there's definitely an opportunity. How we see it is to establish, like happened with the Artificial Intelligence Council, to establish a cybersecurity council that has representation from all the critical infrastructure domains and helps us figure out where we already are pretty good, right? In places like, I think the electric grid is federally regulated. They have obligations, and I think their cybersecurity position is probably better than maybe small municipal drinking water suppliers. And so how does this council could have the opportunity to kind of cut across the section and looking at ensuring things like the establishment, if they don't exist, or the adoption of standards for cybersecurity, so that people in a small municipal power company can have the same feeling of confidence that those that get their electricity from a large provider do, that at least from a cyber threat perspective, there is a standard expectation of performance, which would lead into how does that position us to start to have that ability long-term to be able to triangulate events and serve in a greater capacity to protect Vermonters' information that's not just in our purview, but not only relates to the information they have at these places, but is also critical to the day-to-day operation of everyone in the state of Vermont. And so that's what this proposal is about. We think the timing is right, when we look at things like what's going on with, all the discussion around TikTok, right? We've banned it here on state devices. There's discussion of actually giving the president the ability to do that, not just on federal devices and stuff, but banning it from the country. And so these threats are not going away. So how do we start to break down some of what may be traditional silos for different infrastructure domains to start working together and recognizing that we all serve Vermonters and we all have an obligation to those Vermonters, and how can we do it better? short pitch. We will, obviously, if you would like to have more testimony on it, we'd be glad to come back and dive in a little deeper on the specifics of it.
Could you give an example of, I think this is an easy question of sort of what the representatives would look like from those critical infrastructure? Who are we talking about?
I don't think I have the bill in front of me. So we're talking, there would be representatives from the executive branch. There would be representatives from the legislature, Representative Chase.
Representative Chase.
Representative Chase would be one of them. But it would be our chief information security officer. We're looking to representatives from a state municipal water system. That would be like appointed by the governor. We'd be looking for representatives from like one of the healthcare systems. We're thinking, I don't know if we included, is this touchscreen?
It is not, but two.
Yeah, I have it in front of me. It's like state municipal water system appointed governor.
Yeah.
Electrical public utility.
Yeah, utility.
Yeah,
Okay.
utilities,
Hospital or.
hospital or accountable care organizations, businesses related to essential supply chain, right? So I use the heating oil as an example, right? But something that we would consider an essential supply chain to Vermont, having representatives from them to make sure that we want to cast a broad net, right? So that what we're doing is going to not create something that we're going to end up back here the next year after we do it because we didn't consider a certain area or domain.
Two additional ones, Attorney General and Adjutant General.
Attorney General, Adjutant General, the Governor's Homeland Security Advisor, right, tying this back to our coordination with the Department of Homeland Security and stuff like that. Department of Vermont Emergency Management, because that's we have a great emergency management group here in the Department of Public Safety, but it's primarily been in pandemic or natural disaster space. But there's an opportunity, I think, long term as we mature to understand how can those resources be brought to bear in a situation where a municipal utility becomes attacked or ransomware or something like that, and how can those resources assist? So, thank you, Representative Chase. Sure.
Questions from the committee? Daniela? Thank you for coming in and doing a deep dive into some of those budget requests and giving us a little bit of a pitch for us to take up H291. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So committee, unless there's anything else the secretary would like to leave us with, I would like to take a very brief break and be in our seats and ready to hear amendments on our elections bill at 11:30.
Thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank